Hi, and welcome to Book Club Babble's Authors Chat, Authors Cut Live with Leah DeCesare tonight. I am Tabitha Lord, your host from Book Club Babble. And before we begin, I just want to go over a few housekeeping items. If you are joining us live on Zoom and you'd like to submit a question, please just hover over the bottom of your screen and find the little chat function, type us a question, and I will make sure that it gets worked into our interview and that Leah answers it. So, welcome, my friend. It's so good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you for being here tonight. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little bit and just tell our readers a little bit about how you got into writing. I know you've sort of been a writer for, it's in your DNA, but just, how you got from there to here, what you did in your past life. Just give us some, the down and dirty of a little bit about you.
Yeah, sure. It's always hard to know where to start on that, but I feel like I've always like you, I think, always wanted to be a writer. I remember writing poems and little stories. It was my fun thing to do, drawing pictures to illustrate them. I even sent a letter in a few chapters into one of the major publishing houses in New York when I was in 5th grade. So I got like esteemed first rejection letter at 10 years old. But yeah, something I've always wanted to do. And then life takes you on different journeys. So I did something more practical. And when I went to college, I studied advertising, marketing, and French and worked in New York City for Lord & Taylor. And I did buying and PR, event planning, special events, things like that. And I loved it. But then had kids, and in 2010, I started blogging. And I kind of went in kicking and screaming. I didn't understand the whole blogging thing. And but I had been working as a doula at the time and a birth educator, and there actually was a lot of good content, a lot of good things that I felt like I was repeating and thought, wow, if I could share this with people in a broader way, that would be great. Right. So I started blogging, and that got me back into writing in a regular habit, like making that a habit of writing. And in small snippets,
right.
500 words to 1,000 words. So I started doing that, and then it rolled into naked parenting because I have a lot of clients asking me, you should write a book, you should put some of this stuff down on paper. So I had a challenge. I read an ebook that said how to write a book in a weekend. So we can't do it with a novel, as you and I both know, right. But with a lot of Trader Joe's frozen food and an empty house. I went to my parents' empty house while they were away, and I had an outline, and that was all I did. And I had my first draft done by Saturday at noon, and then I had my first revision done by the time I left. So very different experience than writing a novel. But so I wrote Naked Parenting and never expected nonfiction to be my first book. But really, when I hit my 40s, I was like, what are you waiting for? You've always wanted to write novels. What are you waiting for? Go do it. So I rearranged and reprioritized my life and made it happen. So yeah. And now I feel like I'm living my dream now. Like, this is it. I'm living the dream.
It's really exciting when you finally, was the challenge completing a story? What was the challenge that stopped? Because I too didn't start my first project really until, I did some blogging, same kind of, so we have similar histories that way. And I didn't write my first book until I was 40. And my challenge was I didn't believe I could complete that big story arc, like that 90,000 word manuscript, like lots of little ideas, but did I have the wherewithal? So what was would you say was your stumbling block that took, from when you were a kid and you were, already submitting to now and actually doing it? What was the thing?
That's such a good question. I want to say I was naive in that because I did not know what I was doing. And yet I sort of blindly just thought, oh, well, of course I can do that. I can write a book. So I kind of almost never doubted that I would do it. And yet I think it was more about time management. I think I was saying yes to a ton of volunteer jobs and so many other things that I cared about. But when I really got down to it and started saying, well, what do I care about more? So it really became for me prioritizing it and just making that commitment to sit and do it. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, once you get into it, I was like, there were definitely the moments with like, what the heck am I doing? Do I know how to do this? Right. But I kind of just blindly thought, oh, well, sure, I can do that. I just need to figure out how to make the time. And it was more just, making the commitment to myself to do it.
Yeah, that's what I think that's a lot of people don't realize, that it is a time commitment and that you need this extended period of time for the creativity. And you might only write for an hour, but you needed 4 hours to get that productive hour. And I think people don't understand that. So the time is definitely a thing. All right, so you went on and you wrote a fiction novel, and I have it right here. Here's this beautiful book. And it's called Forks, Knives, and Spoons. And this is your fiction debut. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
And of course, I read it and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And we'll talk more about it. But I just want to ask first, where did the concept come from? I actually know the answer to this, but I think it's so sweet. And it's such an interesting, we always have that little seed. And this little seed of yours is just a really cool thing. So tell us a little about where the concept for Forks, Knives, and Spoons came from, and then how it got incorporated into this larger story, created the backdrop for the story.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, so Forks, Knives, and Spoons, my dad and mom and I were out to dinner, 1988, August. I'm about to go off their oldest daughter to Syracuse University, freshman year. And I think my dad was just in a total panic. Like, I'm sending my oldest daughter off, and she's probably still, well, she is. He had reason to believe that I'm still pretty naive about boys. I was at the time. So I think, it was his last ditch effort, and he uses what was in front of him at the restaurant. And he's like, there's 3 types of guys: forks, knives, and spoons. So he gives me this sort of basic outline. And the idea was forks were sort of arrogant, cocky players, and spoons were sort of nerdy, geeky, the nerdy geeky of the 80s, dorky, soft around the edges. And then the biggest category is the knife category, where you'll find a good guy, a nice guy in that category. So I go off to college, and my girlfriends and we just literally started talking like that before, before it was viral, before viral was a thing,
Right.
And we just talked very normally, like, oh my gosh, that guy is such a fork. And it just became very typical way to talk. So when I finally made that commitment to myself I want to write a novel, it was like, well, what's it going to be about? And really this little notion was still just rattling around in my head decades later. And but there was no story. So I really had to build out the characters and the character arc and the whole story around it, because it couldn't be about that, but
Right.
That's sort of the hook and the fun thread that brings it through. And helps them in the end learn to believe in themselves, which is really the story of friendship and believing in yourself as a woman. So, but who knew that that's what I was setting out to write when I was writing about forks, knives, and spoons? Yeah.
It's just such a cute and fantastic thing. And you said it, and I know we talked about this in the written interview, but you said it back in the 80s and the early 90s. So It was your college experience time. And of course it was mine too. And when I read it, I just, the nostalgia and the chuckling over the little thing, it was so familiar, like the experience. And yet it's also, that dating experience and that being off to college and that, and the group living in the dorms is, I think, a timeless experience that women today still, have. So what made you set it then? And I know you did talk about this a little bit in the writing, but I think it was such an interesting answer that you can elaborate a little bit. But what made you set it then? And what were the challenges and the, I would say, the rewards of actually putting it in that time period?
Yeah, you hit on a couple good points. So I thought, I can write a really authentic college experience in the late 80s, early 90s, because I lived that.
Right.
So I really felt, I think it would be much harder in a very different research project to set a college experience today, because it is so vastly different from when we were in school. So that was my first reason for doing it. But then as I got going on it, it really ended up being that a lot of these truths, that there were a lot of things that made the truth stand out even more because it was set against a different era than today. So I felt like it really highlighted and was able to underscore things that showed what is a universal, everybody wants to find true love. Everybody, whatever that looks like, everybody is really seeking to belong and make sense of the world. And that's what these young women are doing as they're coming of age. So I feel like that helped to highlight those things that are still relevant today. And then it took a lot more research than I expected. Like, that was the funny part. I thought, oh yeah, I lived it, right? And pull out a couple yearbooks. What were we wearing sophomore year? What were the songs? But no, there was a lot of continuity issues. There was a lot of research and figuring out, or did that, even silly things like that song came out or that movie came out, but it came out in December and I have them doing it and singing it in June. Well, whoops, I've got to change that. So There were a lot of details that ended up having to be fleshed out for that.
Right. And it was just so authentic though, like the the phone in the hallway, you know, and getting the, we had phones in our rooms too, but you would, even that, you know, you're waiting for the call and then, oh, your roommate's on the phone for an hour and you're waiting for, you know, we didn't have cell phones and just, you know, going to
did we even have caller waiting? Like we didn't even have call waiting.
I don't even think we had that. And going to the computer lab where she, you know, she meets the guy that's really the guy, you know, and they spend all that time there and he helps her and he, you know, like we have computers in our rooms now. There is no need for that. There's so many in social media. You know, there was a real interactiveness between the students and like you had to talk to a person. It wasn't just on a screen, you know, and it was just a very nostalgic thing to read about it, but it also did create certain plot things that could go a certain way. Like you're talking about, you know, like during the fire drills. Well, we would just text one another now and be like, oh, where are you? I'm right here. Okay, whatever. But, you know, it was this chaos back then. I remember the fire drills being downstairs. We're like, where's my roommate? Oh my God, where's so-and-so? Oh geez, did I come downstairs with my sweat? You have my sweatshirt on, you know, and just running around like crazy people. And so there were some things that are different, but you know, the universal piece of relationships. And that's another thing I wanted to talk a little bit about tonight is the relationship. So there was the relationship between Amy and her dad was a single dad. And so he sends her off with this piece of advice about, you know, how she's going to navigate. And I just thought that was such a lovely relationship. And it has to be a bit reflective of your own with your dad. Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one thing that I think novelists throughout time are always asked, right? Like everybody thinks it's autobiographical. And I mean, certainly I would relate most to Amy simply because it was her dad who shared this and it was my dad who shared this with me.
Right.
But yeah, my dad, Tom York is very much based off of my dad. I mean, the drives and all that. So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, I dedicated it to my dad. It's certainly very reminiscent of our relationship. And I feel very grateful to have had that and been able to, you know, share wisdom through him. And yeah, it was.
Well, it's such a sweet relationship that I thought that it felt so authentic. I was like, that's got to be her real, you know, like that's got to be real, you know.
Well,
I mean, even though the details
are a secret. So it had a mom in it too, because of course I had a mom in it. Right. And then I was at a writer's conference and sitting and talking with two like absolute awesome New York Times bestselling authors, Ann Hood and then Jackie Michard. And I'm having we're just at the end of the conference having, you know, cocktails in the lobby of the hotel with some other people. And Ann is chatting me, well, tell me about your book. And I give her a little like 3 sentences. And then Jackie sits down. She goes, well, tell Jackie about your book. Well, Jackie Michard is the one that said, well, hold on. Of course she shouldn't have a mom too. She's got to have a dad, and the dad has to be older so that she really is connected with him in a different way. And that's always been him. And he has, you know, he's a little older so that she's really buying into this. And I was like, wow. So of course I go up to my hotel room and I download all the things they say and eventually went back and rewrote it and wrote the mother out. And then my sister, who had been an early reader and then read it again, she calls me right away after reading this new version. She goes, you killed mom. It's not
I did. Mom. It's not really mom though. Really, I swear.
Yeah, but it was very funny. So there was a mom, and then I did have to switch that out a little bit. And I think it really, really worked.
Well, I think so, because Amy, she wouldn't have had the blinders on as much, you know, and stuck to the formula. I think if there had been a little bit more of a female balance in her life, you know, I mean, but she was trying to not please her dad. It wasn't like that, but she was trying to, he's got wisdom and he's right and he's smart and he's my dad and I'm gonna, you know, and it kind of kept those blinders on her, I think, for a little bit longer than she might have otherwise done. And that was interesting. And then the other relationships, of course, were, you know, Amy and her roommate, and then Amy and the girl down the hall, who's kind of the wild one and who you get to see this really lovely transformation many, many years later. And then there's their relationship with the guys. And Joey, I have to say, is one of my favorite characters, and his family, because like, look, we all grew up in Rhode Island. We've all got that Italian family Sunday dinners at Graham's, you know, or whatever. And that was just so much fun. How much fun was that to put in there?
Those are probably some of my favorite scenes, without a doubt. I mean, I think it was, so I married a 100% Italian guy. I'm half Italian, but he is 100% Italian. and going into his family as a young woman and meeting them and then having all the dinners. I mean, that is his family, but like amped up a little bit, but only actually a little bit.
A tiny bit, right?
A little. But yeah, those scenes were so much fun. And as I was writing, I remember I was in another room and I would Skype him at work and I'd say, I need a couple more good Italian names. And he's literally pulling names out of his family. And it's all these awesome names, you know, Nunzio and Pasquale and Orazio. And I'm like, yeah, those were super fun to write. And I do have a really soft spot in my heart for Joey too.
She was just a sweet guy. And, you know, and she really, you know, kind of really lets him down, and yet the forgiveness is there and her realization. And so without spoiling too much of the plot, but, you know, that was a really powerful, I think, you know, testament to really saying, you know, I got to go with my heart but yet I actually could feel that. I mean, in this state, especially, you can feel the ethnic divisions, not so much in our generation, but my parents had it. My mom is Italian and my dad is English. And there was a huge to-do when they met and started dating. And it was like, you know, my mom was her Italian family. That was not, you know, they were not super well received on the other side. And it's like, you know, but fast forward a generation and we get past that. And that was really fun. I really enjoyed that. So did you know where all the characters were going to end up, or did any of them surprise you with their?
Yeah, I think I had a very, like I said, I didn't know what the heck I was doing when I started to do this. I had very, very vague, like I have become a plotter and my second book has been so much more efficient because of that. So I had a vague notion of what each character, like what their growth would be and where they would go, but not enough for sure. In fact, originally it had been like one of the early versions was really all Amy's point of view. And I was struggling because Amy wasn't coming alive enough. Like she wasn't three-dimensional enough. And so an early editor said, listen, you really know Veronica great. And you have to give Veronica equal time on the page. So I went back and did a major revision and made it both of their stories. So it's in both of their points of view, not equally and not alternating, but really it's both of their stories back and forth. And it worked so much better. And as soon as I did that, Amy came alive because we were able to now see Amy also from Veronica's point of view. Right. So it really, really worked. So, yeah, I had a little vague notion. And I think it's a very interesting thing because I'm not about all this mystical writing and things sort of just appear and happen. And yet, weirdly, sometimes things do. Mm-hmm. So even though I have, you know, a plotted course, you don't necessarily know how. I might know what's going to happen in a scene or what has to happen or how the plot has to move forward, but I don't necessarily know where or what's going to be said or how it's going to unfold. So I think there are things that that do surprise me. One of them was in this Santa type character that shows up on the
subway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so random. That was completely I remember I was sitting on my couch and I'm writing and I used to commute on Metro North. So I loved the thought of she's on Metro North and she's so upset and she's got her head down and she's crying. And then she feels the seat pop up because there's somebody who sits next to her. So I loved that. And I remember looking up and going, well, who the heck just sat here? Like, who's here? Who sat with her? And so it sort of evolved from that. And at first I was going to get rid of him. And at first he was a little bit creepy. And my early readers were like, did not like him. But I really turned out to like the message that he had. Mm-hmm. So I ended up keeping him and sort of toning him down to be not as creepy Santa. And
right. Sort of like a sweet, you know, almost the mom's favorite, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he was a surprise. So things like that kind of happen and appear and, you know, yeah.
Yep. And I think some of the minor characters, I know we talked about this a little bit in the written one too, but you had some really good minor characters that were, you know, they didn't have a lot of time on the page, but yet they had a very big personality or they had a big impact in the story. And so we talked a little bit about who your favorites were, but can you talk a little bit about where did they come from and how did you work them in and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's funny because I think that, I don't know how this is for you, but I felt like, at least with this book, that I had sort of an actual real life person partly in mind at the beginning. And so I had like, for example, Ian. Ian turned out to be nothing like this guy that was a dear friend in college. But I originally was thinking about this one guy who I had a very platonic, very good relationship with in college. But then he turned out to be something completely different. And I don't think of him at all, really. Like, it's really, he's Ian now. But it sort of started with that little bit of a kernel. So some of the minor characters started that way. But even some of the, like, I mean, honestly, even the main character, Veronica, Amy's roommate, started as one of my best friends. And it's really funny because what remained of her, Veronica is totally a different person. But what remained of her was this like crazy, what's the word, like commitment to the truth, like her just absolute, like her rule following and her just being so innately honest. That's what stuck from my friend Dana, but really Veronica then became her own person. So yeah, and even Ian served, like he was there, but then he ended up serving a much more important role than I had originally planned for. So it was nice. Yeah. And even like, I'm thinking now, I hadn't planned, like I thought this was one and done, it's over, but a lot of people keep saying, well, sequel, and I'm sort of like,
thinking, where are they now? And what are they all doing? It would be fun to check in on them. And
I think so. So they're only 24 when we end it. So part of me is like, it could be kind of fun to go back and see like the Bennett brothers. Like I really liked Zach Bennett. Like what happened to him?
What happened to those boys? Yeah.
Even Jenny, like Jenny, I think has some potential.
She has her own. Yep.
And I really, I mean, obviously there'll still be Veronica and Amy's story and what happens with them, but I have a lot of I've been starting to really note take. I have a lot of fun ideas of peeking back. And I think a lot of those secondary characters will be able to come alive.
They could be bigger in the story, in the stories, because you planted enough, they were developed enough and people are attached enough to them and they have enough of a story that you'd be willing to follow them into another, you'd want to see what happens to them. So I say go for it. That's
Thank you. So I'm thinking about
that. For sure. So how do you feel about editing? Now, so sometimes I know our readers like to hear about an author's process. And so, we talked a little bit about what you do, but how do you feel about editing? How long do you go through that process? What does it look like for you? Are you one of those people that drinks their way through editing and cries and, or do you actually say, hey, this is good. I'm taking something good and making it better? Because I hear all kinds of things from people.
It probably runs the gamut, right? But I think that I need to have more, like, okay, so for my process, I am not somebody who writes every single day. And I kind of really wish I were, and yet I just don't. And I've sort of given into the fact that this is me and this is who I am and it works for me. I do feel so much happier and better at the end of a day when I've written. So I don't know why I don't do it every day, but I do work really, really well in like deep, especially when I'm doing first draft or early creating. I need like hours and hours and hours. I like to just go where I have no other obligations. Like I don't have to look at a clock and know I have to pick up a kid or do something. And then I can go really deep. So like I said, I will go to my parents' house while they're away and just literally just bring a bag of salad and frozen food where I can eat really fast. And I'll write 15 hours a day and just go deep, deep, deep. I wake up with ideas and solutions to problems and I just can go. When it comes to editing, I feel like I can do that in much more snippets. And in general, I think, okay, so for major revisions, sometimes it's frustrating because you have a real puzzle and you really have to figure out how this puzzle is going to fit together. And then once you change one little thing, now you have to change everything. So I think that sometimes it can be frustrating when I can't figure it out, but yet some of that is part of the fun and the challenge of making it work. And then when you figure it out, it's so satisfying.
Yeah, like Eureka.
And then the later stages of editing, I actually like too, because for me, I just feel like it's continuing to polish it and refine it and polish it and refine it. And I want to pick just the right word and just the right sentence. And I'm very, very particular when I read and when I write about continuity. So I am, if I use that word, it's not going to show up again in that chapter, right? Like I'm going to make a phrase or whatever. I'm making sure I'm using certain things sparingly, or I'm going to really look for all that continuity stuff too. So I kind of do like that. I feel like it's a very different part of your brain and a very different process.
Different editing process. You usually have a different editor that does each piece. Your developmental edits, and then you do your copy edits, and then you do your proofreading, and
Right.
one has a different, and you know, those of us that do a lot of the work ourselves do a lot of those pieces, you know.
And
so
also when you're looking at it and you're reading it each time through, you're looking at it for different things.
Right.
You know, I'm looking at it for that high level of like, okay, let's take out Amy's mom, right? She doesn't have a mom. Like that's high, and add Veronica in equal time. We're thinking big picture stuff,
Right.
and you don't care where the commas are at that point, you know, like, so like, exactly. It's a very different game than when you're looking at the nitty gritty. So I feel like I just like each step when I'm in it, and I make the most of it while I'm there.
Right. I feel like I get the edit back, and I know it's going to be awful when I first get all the red lines and the commentary. And so then I really do put it aside. I cry, I drink, I rage, I whatever. And then I get back into it. And like you said, it's a puzzle, and it's like, all right, if I do this, ooh, and then the creative process starts again. And that's kind of satisfying.
And don't you feel like it does make it better? And I feel like this person's a partner. This person's somebody who's there to make this better. And I very much value that. So I go in it with that attitude. It's like you said, it doesn't mean that it's not difficult or
there are moments.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. They all have their nice moments, and they all have their very frustrating, like fearful moments. But yeah.
All right. So let's talk about this beautiful cover art.
Thanks. Yeah.
So who did your cover art? How did you,
Yep, Julie Metz. She's one of the designers with Spark Press, and so yeah, we were talking, and I was able to give some input, and she had sent different things early on, and when she goes, oh, hold on, and she had sent me a bunch of photographs and everything, and then she scribbled on like a little paper and sent a picture to me. She goes, and she's a great illustrator too. She goes, what if I hand letter this, this, and this? And she sends it off, and I was like, okay, I like it. So she sent it out, and she goes, here's your cover. This is the cover that's the winner, and this is the cover that's it. And I was like, all right.
It's really attractive. It's very catchy, and it's pretty and sweet. And like the book itself it's got warmth to it, and it's got this grandness of ideas though about relationships stuff. I think the cover is so reflective of that without knowing why. Do you know what I mean? Like that's what a good artist does.
Puzzle. It's like, do you put and she's like, it's a cardinal rule of cover design that you don't put, like it's called Forks, Knives, and Spoons. You don't have a fork, knife, and spoon on the cover. So, but the Empire State Building is on it, so like having the Empire State Building, I don't know if you can see, but like that's a super important, like it almost is not really a character, but it's a very important place and setting in the book.
Oh my God, my cat.
Oh, hello.
Off you go. Yes, back to the Empire.
All good. Yeah. So when we started really talking about where do we go, I was like, the Empire State Building, and she's, and Manhattan and this. And so at first, and I'm not a designer, I have a good aesthetic eye, but it was like, I was like, defer to you because you know what you're doing. Right. So at first she shows me this picture with all this blue sky, and I liked it because the blue is optimistic, and Amy's, incurably optimistic. I loved her adding in the hearts because it shows that little bit. It's not culinary. Although, so funny story. I was doing an event, and it was a ticketed event where you got lunch and the author talk, and you got a book included. So I'm going around and introducing myself before the lunch starts, and I was chatting, and I introduced myself to this one guy, and he goes, yeah, I won this at a silent auction. And a couple people around him start chuckling, the story. And he goes, yeah, I thought it was about food and cooking. And he like won the ticket to the lunch and the book, and he goes, and I have to admit, which this part cracks me up, he goes, it took me 100 pages to figure out it wasn't about cooking. I was like, oh no, the first sentence should have clued you in, I was dying. I was like,
well, I guess because when you're expecting something and it's not that, you keep thinking, no, I'm wrong.
It must be coming. It must be coming. It was so funny. He was probably like in his 60s or something. It was just the funniest thing. I was like, I'm sorry to disappoint you that it's about college and boys
and boys and girls and relationships. Yeah. I know, right? See, now my husband's like, ooh, that looks like, my husband loves women's fiction, and he loves,
that's great.
So I'm like, you can read it next, sweetie. He's like, yeah, put it on my table,
on my TBR list. Oh, that's great.
So speaking of that, what's on your list now? I have seen your pile, yes. And I know you write reviews and such as well. So what's let's say, what's the last favorite thing that you've read, or something that stands out in your mind recently that you've read that you're like, I've got to recommend this? Doesn't have to be an absolute favorite, but something.
So funny because it's always so hard. I should pull up my Goodreads, right? So right now I'm only like a little bit into it, but I'm reading the new Wiley Cash book. I've seen him twice and I am reviewing that one. The Last Ballad, historical fiction, really enjoying that right now. I just finished Reconstructing Amelia, which is a little bit older. Kimberly,
I've heard of it.
It was good. Like it was good. Like it was kind of pitched as like Gone Girl, and I didn't think it was anything like Gone Girl, but it was like, but it had that same like suspenseful interest to it. I really enjoyed that. I just read Amy Tan's memoir, which is good, especially if you like Amy Tan. She really reveals a lot. She gets really vulnerable in that. Let's see. I read my first Penny Louise book. Have you read her? No. Like crime fiction? I read always on book on tape. So I saw it. I walked into the library. It was right on the end cap. I just picked that one up, but it was good. I liked that too. So I know
yeah. I like this, and I've never liked that.
I'm actually reading right now. I just started Go Set a Watchman, the Harper Lee book, because I felt like I have to read it.
I know. I sort of feel like that too. One of our book club Babel girls reviewed it and was.
Yeah. It didn't get great reviews, and I always feel sad because it's literally To Kill a Mockingbird. I would put that, if I had to pick, like that's one of my all-time favorites. In fact, in 8th grade, I wrote to Harper Lee. I never heard back from her, but like I love, like that book was so moving, and I've read it multiple times since then, and so I want to read it because of that. So so far, I mean, it's sweet. I'm very much at the beginning of it, but I wanted to read that. So
yeah, I know I have those books on my list, those kinds that I'm like, I need to read this, and it's on the list, and we'll see if I like it, but yeah. All right, so just a couple more questions because we're coming up on, past time, but that's all right. You won some awards.
Oh, yes.
Aren't awards fun? And don't
they really are. Yes, they really are.
Tell us about your awards. I know I have that in big letters. I'm like, ask about the awards.
If you have them in front of you, you probably can rattle them easier than I can. But yeah, it's super exciting to just be acknowledged and recognized at all. I mean, I was a distinguished favorite for the Independent Press. I won like Reader's Favorite Gold Medal. I just won like a Book of the Year, like the Outstanding Women's Fiction Award. So, I mean, and it's kind of funny because you just get an email and you don't expect it. And all of a sudden there's an email and you're like, and I often am yelling. So this summer one came through in July and I was at my parents' house with them there. I was staying with them and all of a sudden I'm upstairs and I'm squealing and yelling. And my mom is like, what's the matter? I'm like, oh.
I won a thing.
And she's like, what'd you win? I'm like, I don't know yet. Hold on.
It just says winner. Give me a minute. I got to read the email.
And you're clicking and looking and yeah. So it's just been such a thrill. And it is just, it's really, I mean, you want to say like, it's validating. You put something out into the world and I feel really proud of it and I feel really good about it. But there is still that vulnerable quality. Yes. You put it out and you're like, oh my gosh, people are going to read this. And then
they're going to have things to say about it. Okay. So I just did an interview with somebody else. I was the interviewee. And one of the questions, and I knew it ahead of time, so I'm going to spring it on you, and you don't have to answer, but it was so funny. He said, tell us a terrible review. Like what? And I had to tell him. And one of mine was, this book was as boring as a bowl of tepid oatmeal.
So it's so funny. I will have
make me feel good about me.
I'm in a group called 17 Scribes, and it's awesome. It's all debut novelists for new adult and adult fiction for 2017. Yep. And one of the threads we have in our secret group is share a bad review, and it's so true because you have to put it somewhere because sometimes. Okay, so one of my favorites was one where they said, I really, really don't like giving bad reviews, but I feel like if I share this, it will help Leah. And she used my first name like she knew me. And, I will help Leah become a better writer. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, gee, thanks so much for that. Like, and then, I've had, uninteresting, thankfully I try not to memorize them. And
I know, me too. But the bowl of tepid oatmeal though was pretty,
But I do remember the guy, I always laugh that there was a guy on Amazon named Harold. It might've been a woman. Harold, but we keep joking because Harold was like a 1-star review and it was something like not nice. And I just cracked up. I'm like, so now every time I get a bad review, it's a Harold review.
It's a Harold review. I know. And it just comes with the territory, but
it does.
you can laugh about it a little bit. And especially, when you have the, like you said, the validation of, you know, professionals standing behind the book and readers saying, this is a favorite, this is a pick. It's such a nice feeling.
I think people too, I don't know what people think. I think they forget there's actual real people behind it. I don't know. Like,
I could
honestly,
never say those words to someone. If I don't like it, I just say nothing, or, you know, I just say nothing or whatever. But yeah, anyway.
I know, it's funny. And then it makes me feel better. So I'll share this with you, and then because I know you probably have to go. But somebody said to me, you could have the best, most gorgeous, beautiful, delicious, juicy peach in the whole world, and there's still going to be somebody who doesn't like peaches. And I was like, that is what you have to remind yourself.
Right.
It's not for everybody, and people aren't going to like it. You know,
I mean, my mom doesn't really love sci-fi, so she reads my stuff and she's like, well, I didn't really understand all the planets, you know, like I forgot where we were. I'm like, oh God. You know, so then I pass her other books and say, you don't have to read it, Mom, it's okay, but she does. And actually she's good because she's an avid reader, so she recognizes good storytelling. So if she says to me, I brushed over that part, well, someone else is probably going to brush over that part too, because it's about story, not I didn't like sci-fi, you know, but the thing about the planet, I just forget what planet we're on. I'm like, that's all right. You don't have to know. Okay. Anyway, before you go, I would like to hear what you're doing next. Tell us what you're doing next, what project you're working on, and go ahead with the because it did sound interesting.
Yeah, so I do have to work on a better elevator pitch, but
it's good. You can use that one.
I don't have it memorized. So, yeah, but it's about a doula, and she really crosses a lot of boundaries. She's a doula is somebody who works with families during a birth or immediately postpartum, you know, for about the first 3 months of a baby's life. So it's a quite intimate job. You're seeing people at their most vulnerable, and you're being trusted with quite a lot. So, having been a doula for many years, the idea has been percolating. As they do. So, yeah, and it came from a story that I heard, a real life story, and all I knew was that I heard that this doula had run off with the dad in a couple she was working for. And my gosh, like what a horrible, incredible breach of ethics and every possible profession, you know. But that's kind of stuck with me. So I thought, oh, that's good. But the doula, so it's told from the doula's point of view and the mom's point of view. The mom has a lot of hidden secrets that help justify some actions. The doula is overcoming a stillbirth. So she's really a sympathetic character, and she really has a sterling, perfect reputation. This is really an out of character situation, but it really does. I hope I've executed where you can relate to each of them and kind of understand each of them. But yeah,
that's a great story.
I did it in 2017. Thank you. I did it in 2017, so I didn't have to go back and do research. If it's here now, it's here.
Right. that song hasn't been released until the spring. Yeah, I know.
I know. Like I could do anything that's out right now.
If I've set your things on different planets, you don't have to worry about that.
I do not have that problem. That's for sure.
All right, my friend. Well, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much. So this interview will be posted to YouTube, and it will be on our website within the next week. So others that didn't get to see us live can come and check it out.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great fun.
Absolute pleasure. Have a great night.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.